End of the talk, so write down any questions that you have, so that you remember them, and then we'll hopefully have some time for Q&A at the end. We go for just about 50 minutes here, so. All right, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. Hi, everyone. Really excited to be here. My undergrad is in English education, so I always love returning to the classroom. So I was really excited to be invited to chat with you all. So my name is Michael Elizabeth Sakis. Yes, my first name is Michael. My mom named me that. You can ask her why. And so I am the Colorado River Communications Specialist with the Colorado Department of Natural Resources. So from 2016 to 2023, I was a reporter and host for Colorado Public Radio. And so I've been in this new role with the state for almost a year now. And so I do want to make that distinction really clear, and I'll kind of talk about the reasons why, because as a reporter and host, I'm reporting on, I'm unbiased. I am talking to a bunch of different people from all over. And then as a state communications representative, my priorities are with the state and working with people here in Colorado to help them better understand how the state's protecting Colorado's water users and water resources. So very different roles, but both I focused on the Colorado River. And so, I've got stuff here that I want to talk about, but I definitely want to be a resource for you if you have questions or if there's specific things that you're interested in. So, I guess what I first want to start, is this, it's kind of a mix of majors in here, correct? Or most people, yeah, mix of majors, I think. Okay. People interested in journalism, raise your hands, and that's okay if not. People interested in communications roles, people interested in water resources. Yay. Okay, nice. Good to know. And so I guess I can start with, I'm going to kind of start with what I was working on and then move into what I'm working on now. There we go. Okay. So, show of hands, has anyone listened to Parched? Anyone familiar with Parched? Okay, yay. So this was a project. So for a couple of years at Colorado Public Radio, I was on the climate and environment team. And part of that was a group of journalists. And we kind of decided one day who's going to kind of do what within climate change reporting and environmental reporting. And one of the topics was water. And I had reported on some water stories and was really interested in the topic. But when I kind of was like, hey, sure, I'll work on water, I didn't really know exactly what I was getting myself into. Super complicated, obviously, as you know, complex topic, touches people's lives and, so many different ways that they don't even realize where their water comes from. And so one of the things, so after a couple of years of focusing on water reporting, especially around the Colorado River, I pitched this project. Again, no longer working on this project, no longer a CPR employee, so I'm not here talking, representing them. But this was the project that I pitched and worked on for almost exactly a year, and ended up being about 11 episodes long. So I'm just going to play the trailer so that you guys kind of have a sense of what the show is.
The Southwest United States has been in a drought for more than 20 years. It's adding up to be a big problem for the Colorado River and the people who depend on it.
With the historical low levels of this lake, it's scary, actually.
We cannot just allow nature to disappear.
My name is Michael Elizabeth Sakis, and I'm a water reporter for Colorado Public Radio. I grew up in Colorado.
Moving water around in order to create these metropolitan areas that we inhabit. That's sort of the story of the West.
In order for me and tens of millions of other people to keep living in the West, we need to focus on this problem and consider all kinds of solutions.
Once you start looking at bringing water across the continent, it's a very different thing.
This water that we're going to drink right now, 2 hours ago, it was in the Pacific Ocean.
There's got to be something more to it than take out your grass, and it's ugly. quite frankly. I mean, cactuses are not cute.
Part of figuring out what solutions to pursue is understanding how we got in this mess.
This is where the Colorado River once flowed uncontrolled. Here's where man conquered this mighty river.
I laugh because that was the thought. We'll build these gargantuan facilities, and we're going to tame nature. And the arrogance of that thinking.
The good news is we can choose to help the Colorado River and ourselves. Introducing Parched, a new podcast from CPR News about people who rely on the river that shaped the West and have ideas to save it. I'm going to take you on a journey on this show.
We are on a wooden bridge with the Colorado River flowing underneath it. This spot is where it all begins.
So I just picked a head of broccoli.
I get to eat this. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
Most importantly, we're going to talk about what we can do about less water in a growing region.
Every home has the capability to recycle water. That's the message, and that's the shift in mentality.
I think we're only screwed if we're not willing to act.
Parched, the new podcast from CPR News, is coming April 18th. Follow the show on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. The Southwest.
Okay. So that was like our little audio trailer. Hopefully you heard that okay. Didn't know how to turn it up very much. But essentially, I have been working on Colorado River issues, and my boss at the time was like, hey, if anyone has any podcast episode or podcast ideas, let me know. So I pitched in this concept, and it became totally a dream project. Went to Mexico and Nevada and Arizona and parts of Colorado, and really the goal was, the reason why I felt like a project like this was important was because I'm sure, so I guess another raise of hands, how many people follow Colorado River issues, are somewhat familiar with kind of, okay, great. So most people in the room, excellent. So I felt like a podcast that was fun and engaging and educational would help people who are seeing these headlines and these complicated stories, but who wanted kind of an invitation into the issue and learn more about it while also being taken on these journeys. And so first we were thinking we'll just stay in Colorado, but then we ended up doing a bunch of traveling, seeing where the river starts in Colorado, going to where the river ends in Mexico. And yes, it was a really cool, exciting project. And so really what it was kind of focused on, we wanted to, because we wanted to have fun with it, and because we know people are really hungry for solutions, we really focused on solutions that people are talking about. And so these are ones that, are they good? Are they bad? That's for people who are listening to decide. But really, we just wanted to kind of explore the topic so that people got a chance to hear the good, hear the bad, form an opinion on some really complex topics. So we covered desalination. I don't have to read this entire list, but these are kind of like the top things that we covered. Should I read the list since there's people watching, or do you think they can see it? Okay. So I would say, some of the really important goals was to bring people to these issues and find people these issues are impacting them. So one of the really fun episodes was probably our episode in Las Vegas. People been to Las Vegas? Oh, yeah, quite a few people. Not so cool. So Las Vegas is kind of seen as this problem child in the Colorado River Basin because people see fountains and it's kind of represents a town like that existing in the deserts of Nevada. It's kind of strange when you see it, right? And it's 95% of their water supply comes from the Colorado River, comes from Lake Mead. So Lake Powell is the reservoir that sits underneath the upper basin states, and then it feeds Lake Mead, which is what the lower basin states pull from. So that's California and I'm sorry, I've got the upper basin and lower basin mixed up right now. Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and then in the lower basin, it's Arizona, California, and oh my gosh, why am I blanking on them? Do you know? Sorry, the states are mixing up my head right now, but and so anyway, sorry. This is how I usually have more notes out here, so I apologize. Anyway, so when we went to Las Vegas, we actually went out onto the Bellagio fountain. So that was like such a cool moment because like I thought, oh, the Bellagio fountain, like where is that water supply coming from? And you know, we find out that it's groundwater and it's being treated. So it's not actually Colorado River supply. So it's a really cool like surprise moment. Like I actually got to float out on the Colorado River, or sorry, out onto the Bellagio fountain and get to experience that. So what was really fun about this project was just the idea of being able to just meet people where they are, being able to find folks who want to tell these stories and be able to kind of bring that to life. So just a huge emphasis for me was being able to actually meet people where these issues are impacting them, and part of telling these stories to get people to want to engage with them, to learn from them, to have fun in the process was this kind of like journey. And I'll show you a funny review later, but like I kind of was like, oh, you know, like I kind of wanted to be like the Dora Explorer of this journey. But I mean, it's kind of a joke because this is my favorite review ever. I wish Dora the Explorer did post this show. But we got wonderful reviews otherwise, but I just love that one. It just makes me laugh. But a big part of it was such a complicated topic. When you hear stories around the Colorado River, it's easy to get bored, confused, especially if you're not like paying attention to it or studying it or an expert on it. And so a part of this was, if we want people to pay attention to the show and have a lot of fun, who's being impacted by these stories? Who can actually tell us, you know, what desalination is like, but without even really using like the words desalination. So like for that example, I went to San Diego and we drank water that had just been in the ocean just like an hour prior. So we actually like toured this facility, talked to people who drink this water, talked to people who have really mixed feelings about these projects because they're really expensive. So they want to support it. And then at the same time, they're worried about water bills going up, or how does this impact, you know, already at-risk communities? And so that was what was cool about pitching this project was, how do we find these people? Because we knew if we couldn't find them, this was just going to be, you know, I hate to use it, a dry water. So these people were just paramount to telling these stories. And I think another really awesome highlight was being able to, you know, so I am from Colorado, and I think it's been a huge learning process for me. Where does my water come from? And so, you know, in my early 20s, I think my interactions with the Colorado River are, oh, this, you know, it's the river that's on the western side of the state. Oh, it's that river that I see when I'm driving through Glen Canyon, you know, or like, Glenwood Canyon. Or it's the river that, oh, when I go to the hot springs in Glenwood Springs, you know. Little did I know, of course, growing up in Fort Collins and the Denver area, that a lot of my water comes from the Colorado River. And so I think it was, you know, my early 20s where I really started learning more about this problem, especially when the drought hit. So in early 2000, that's really when this big ongoing drought hit the Colorado River basin. And so now we're kind of dealing with a river that no longer exists, right? It's with climate change, the flows of the river have gone down on average 20%. And so it's just, there's a lot of use, growing use, different kinds of uses. and less water with climate change. And so that was another thing too, is, wanting to talk about this issue and engage people and pull people in is, how do you talk about climate solutions? How do you talk about solutions without making any single one of them feel like the solution? So we went to another really interesting part of this journey was like when I was in Arizona, I saw this broccoli field. And so this broccoli farmer is growing broccoli in the desert. And it's like such a jarring landscape of like desert and dust and dirt. And then seeing this, this farmer who's, fourth generation, this is how his family makes money and how they've been making money, and learning about, the struggles for him and the worries around less water. So really that was the goal of the project, was to take a very complicated and seeming boring topic and make it fun. And so, there's a lot of energy, but yes, then this is the review that we got. But really what was really neat about it was the first episode really sets up the problem. And I got this really amazing dream tape. This woman was standing at Hoover Dam and she was looking over the Lake Mead. And while she was looking at it, I was like, hey, can I chat with you? And she lives in Arizona and is incredibly worried about her water supply. And so she opened up, to me about those issues and how she had been at the reservoir only a couple years earlier, or it might have been like a year and a half earlier, not really that long ago. And then this time she was bringing her brother. She wanted her brother to see this is their water supply, right? Like this is their dwindling water supply. So she's there and she's concerned. And it was hot that day, and I'd been standing out there with my microphone for like 2 hours waiting to see if someone would talk to me. And but she just really set up the problem perfectly. And that's really our first episode. So then that way, if you know nothing about the Colorado River, or if you're curious, then those characters and those, you can connect with that, right? And it's really interesting too, because we were seeing the numbers of people who listen to the show. And it was, definitely the Southwest was, the strongest listening. But we had lots of people on the East Coast listening and lots of people on the West Coast listening too. We actually had, we reached a ton of folks way above and beyond what we ever imagined with this show. It was incredible, the response. And so I think that the response alone is just a wonderful reminder of how much people care about this topic and how they really do want to be invited in to learn more about it and to feel like they're being spoken to in a way that they can understand, that it's not, that they can walk away and talk to their friend and be like, oh, have you heard about this? Or, oh, this idea, one of the more controversial topics that we talked about in the show are moving water from the Mississippi River to the Colorado River Basin. And so that at the time especially was this, big topic that people were talking about. So, it was a wonderful response, and it felt like it really achieved all of those goals. So after the project, the Colorado Department of Natural Resources posted a listing for a Colorado River communication specialist. So I left CPR for this job specifically because I'm just really passionate about the topic. But so now my job is to really be a communication expert on Colorado's positioning and stance and protecting, the folks here in the state and their water use and the water supplies. So I want to talk a little bit. So essentially, the goal is different but similar for me specifically, right? How do I help people understand this complicated issue with a focus on Colorado and how the state is, working really hard to protect its water and the many, many, many different ways that people use the Colorado River. And I think what's interesting in my role is we've got such a diverse group of stakeholders. We have the public, politicians, students, other states, the media. We communicate internally and externally on a lot of, these issues. And so one example is what the heck is hydrologic shortage? We use that term a lot up here in the upper basin because it's a part of the experience of being a water user. So I'll explain it real fast, but then I'll kind of tell you a tool that we've used to kind of help people better understand this stuff is that kind of going back to the journalism roots or just communication in general is who's got this story to tell that people can actually identify, like a person that's going through this issue. So essentially hydrologic shortages are when someone has water rights in Colorado and in the Colorado River Basin and up in the upper basin specifically. So we'll just talk about Colorado here. But say that on a piece of paper, they can use X amount of water, but then because of drought, because of the, how senior or junior their water rights are, they actually don't get that water. That water doesn't actually exist. And so then they have to make big impacts to their operations because they just don't have that water. Maybe 1 year they get 110% of their supply, and then maybe 1 year they get 60% of their supply. And so then people have to make really big sacrifices, like selling off cattle or fallowing fields, or if they're like a water supplier, or like they have customers, they have to tell those customers, hey, like we're shutting off your head gate, like 2 months early or whatnot. Hopefully those are generally terms that people in their room, water rights and head gates. And okay. Does anyone have any specific questions right now? So tell the story. So I will not play this, but we have this. So one of the things that we've been doing is we've been hosting webinars. One of the really powerful tools and has had great impact. We have, again, just like, it's like a perfect example of that wide audience that we have because we can see them all joining these webinars, journalists and politicians and people in the upper basin and the lower basin, all these different issues. So why we found these to be really important and impactful is we can help people better understand these issues here in Colorado that help people better understand why we're negotiating the way we are, or why we're, what are, we'll get to that in a minute, but essentially what the upper basin states are saying we'd like to see when it comes to Colorado River management. So we have this really wonderful group of folks talk to us. Again, I won't read these names out loud, but they all helped us better understand what it means to deal with these really, really, really dry years. And again, that drought's been going on for about 24 years now. Won't play this here, but if you want this, you can email me and my email is at the end here. I just really appreciated all these folks just really opened up about very honestly about how hard it is to be doing what they're doing in the face of what's going on in the Colorado River. So like Hannah is a really great example. She's, I believe, a 4th generation rancher. And she said something that's really stuck with me about this idea of, what her grandparents and her great grandparents did, it just doesn't work anymore. And she wants to like make her family proud, but at the same time, she's really having to do a lot of hard things to stay in business and to adapt. And, that can be challenging within the family unit of being able to be like, I'm the next generation, I'm here, I want this to work, but we have to make some big changes. And that's, we are seeing those big changes in the upper Colorado River Basin and in Colorado. Less farming and ranching because those folks are having to make those really tough decisions about like, what's my livelihood here? Do I sell this water to a local, city that wants to use it? Do I keep farming and ranching? Do I, set up something where it ties the water to the land? So that really is so much more impactful, right, than saying hydrologic shortages. It really says, we've got experiencing pain and, really, really tough situations here. And that, of course, informs our team at the Department of Natural Resources when it comes to those negotiations that we're currently in with the other states about Colorado River management. I don't want to play this.
Yeah. So I think
think next. And then this was a really cool kind of like direct result of that. So right after the webinar, and so a big goal is to make sure that we're being clear with reporters on these issues. Because we do see a lot of stories, reporters that maybe are working in the lower basin or more familiar with the lower basin, especially because Lake Mead, it's Lake Powell and Lake Mead are those reservoirs that really show the problem. And so then a lot of those stories kind of focus downstream of us, but we would love to see more stories focusing on what's happening here. And a part of that is just to help that understanding of those really complicated topics. So won't read all this out loud, but this was a really nice note from a reporter after that webinar. They said, as a Denver resident, I rarely get the chance to directly hear ranchers' points of view, and I was struck by their heartfelt emotion and responsibility they felt for previous generations to keep a family business operating. So that was exactly what we're trying to achieve with a tool like that. Another tool that we found that's been super helpful. Oh, and here are the states. Sorry for my brain fart earlier. These are the states: Nevada, California, and Arizona. I wanted to say Mexico. That's why my brain was all hung up. I was like, wait, what's Mexico? Mexico is not a state. So that's why. So it's the 3 lower basin states and the 4 upper basin states. This is an infographic that we recently created. And we found infographics to be super helpful for folks, politicians, the people that are trying to pay attention to this issue, and they just kind of want to know like what's going on, right? So this is something that we created, and this is a tool we've been using to kind of communicate the differences in water uses between the upper basin and lower basin. And so the yellow is the upper basin states, which includes Colorado. So we on average use around 4 million acre feet a year of Colorado River water. And you'll see with the lower basin states, they use a lot more. But I want to dig into these numbers though, so that you have a full understanding. So this is Bureau of Reclamation data. Essentially the yellow, that number includes main stem uses, so that's pulling straight from the Colorado River. It includes tributary uses, which is the streams that go into the Colorado River, and then evaporation and transit loss. So what's lost as the water moves around to nature, essentially, to the atmosphere. And so that's all just kind of lumped into one number. But so for the lower basin states, it's divided up because that's the way they account for it. And there's differences of opinions on what is usage. So this is our opinion that this is what's being used in the lower basin. So this shows you, 2003, a couple years after the big drought hit up to now. And this just helps kind of give people a sense of when we say, so sorry, I don't want to get too, but maybe you all understand this stuff. So the compact, Colorado River Compact signed 100 years ago, essentially said, and there's hard numbers, it's not percentages, but the upper basin gets half the river and the lower basin gets half the river. And so right now, this is where we're trying to help people understand that the upper basin states are using way less than what the compact says, and the lower basin states are using more. And then here's again, just another tool, but the infographics are super impactful, help kind of tell that story. And this is another one that we just recently put out. So these are all the tributaries and the Colorado River main stem. And essentially this is what we're trying to show people of what does flow out of Colorado and all the different voluntary programs that we're investing in to really help bolster a healthy Colorado River system, and to be able to contribute to the overall system and supplies. So I don't mean to fly through that, but talk about it more. And then, so negotiations are ongoing post 2026. So the upper basin and lower basin states are working together to try to come up with a joint plan. Right now we've got 2 separate plans. And something that was really helpful for us to do was to put out, a 2-pager FAQ, kind of giving a breakdown of what we want from those plans. So these are just some resources, especially if you're interested in Colorado River topics and you want to kind of better understand Colorado's stance and upper basin stance and water usage here. I'd love to share any of in all of this, especially if that's kind of where people's focus is kind of mostly on the river itself. So this is Commissioner Mitchell. She is essentially Colorado's lead negotiator on these topics. And we are in the very, very early phases of starting a website completely dedicated to Colorado River issues. No timeline, but it's happening. But right now we have the Commissioner's Corner. And this is a place where we put all of that material I showed you. And we have, speaking events, stories that we feel like are impactful or maybe are quoted in. And then we also do a lot of speaking engagements. Commissioner Mitchell is traveling constantly, as are many members of the team, including myself. And then we created a website to put all of that material about what the upper states, we call it an alternative. I call it proposal, and I'm not supposed to call it proposal. I'm not exactly sure why, but it's the upper basin states alternative. And so essentially, as we go through these negotiations, this is what the 4 upper basin states have given to the federal government to say, this is what we would really like to see moving forward to better manage the Colorado River so that we stop putting the reservoirs in crisis. So we do have this whole website. And what was really interesting was working with reporters on this, because we wanted them to have, we were like submitting, and then we didn't really know, when we were going to make everything very public. So what we did was we put an embargo on material, which essentially means, hey, you can read this. I want you to read this. I want you to take the time. I want you to research it. I want you to understand it. And then in a couple of days, you can publicly start talking about it. So that was a really neat tool, because it just gave reporters, because they feel pressure, right? They do feel pressure to hit publish on a story. And this is stuff can be tough to get right. And so that was a really important tool for us to be able to, talk with a bunch of reporters ahead of time. And then they put out stories that we feel like generally were fair and accurate. So that was great. This is a QR code to the Commissioner's Corner. And it is, I will not lie, it's got a lot of info. It's dense. It's a little hard to read. And that's why we're really hoping to do a neat website where it has all the information there. But then this is my email address. But really, I want to, answer questions that you have. I didn't know if I should stop and be like, hey, let's talk about parched and then move on to my new job. But I'm down to answer questions for both. But again, I just want to make it clear that I am no longer a reporter. Just in case CPR sees this, just kidding. Does anyone have any specific questions or right now? Anything online? Yeah, go ahead.
Is the lower basin using more water? Are there very noticeable reasons for that, such for your agriculture, or why is that?
Yeah. So yes, in case student in the back asked, why is the lower basin using more water? And so this is the thing where here's my limitation, is that I am not Commissioner Mitchell. And so I really like her to answer those types of questions. But I can say that, I was not saying this is the answer, but in Colorado, since we don't have the country's 2 largest reservoirs sitting above us, so it's kind of hard to tell. And this is a pretty, I don't know if oh yeah, my mouse is up there. Okay, so this is a really rough. I designed this, so. But here's Lake Powell, and then here's Lake Mead, very rough. But this water goes here, and then this gives these states a very it's not, it's reliable in the sense that you can tell exactly how much is in it and how much you can go ahead and use, where we don't have that. And so we have to pull straight from the river, from the tributaries, and that means that we are really on those front lines of climate change. So that is why that number, and we have really done a lot of work to keep this number pretty steady. I mean, you're looking at 20 years here, right? Like efficiencies that are, you know, a bunch of efficiency projects that have kept us in this realm. But it does mean, you know, if we had that reservoir above us, we probably would be using more water, right? Because we do, I mean, here's that compact line. So legally, we are allowed to use, you know, close to double, you know, a little less than what we were currently using, but we just don't have that same infrastructure. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
What about charging the lower basin for loss? On most of the ditches where I live, we charge like a percentage of loss.
Okay.
For the amount of water that's lost due to evaporation and seepage. We ever thought about doing that with the lower Colorado?
Yeah, so my understanding right now is that evaporation and transit loss in the lower basin isn't calculated the same way as it is here in the upper basin. So my knowledge on that is for sure limited, but I know that there are calls for making sure that we're keeping closer eyes on evaporation and transit loss in the lower basin like we do up here. But I know that they're different, but I'm not super expert on that. Yeah, hopefully that's somewhat helpful. But that's, I mean, when we do look at this graph, you know, we you know, the reason why they're kind of divided, these numbers are divided up versus not divided up here is because we are trying, you know, this is the accounting, but it's, you know, here it's baked in the cake for the upper basin states, whereas the lower basin states, it's not as much. Yeah.
This is Jennifer Gamble. I'm here at CSU. And would you mind just talking a little bit about your career path and what got you to this place?
Absolutely. So career path, what got me to this place, if these people didn't hear that. So my undergrad is from Colorado State University. Yay, woo woo. And so my undergrad was in English education. And then during that time, I was working for student media a lot, all the time. My favorite place ever. I was working as a DJ at KCSU, which is the college radio station. My first DJ shift was 1 a.m. And I would just play a lot of Iron and Wine and put people to sleep, I'm sure. And then I started writing album reviews for the student paper, and then eventually became the station manager and the editor-in-chief of the Collegian. And so then I had a really amazing advisor who recently left CSU, Dr. Mike Humphrey, and he was saying, hey, you know, you have all this experience, you should move forward for a master's degree in journalism and communication. So then I did that, and that program, so I was 2 years in, only had my thesis left, and then I got the job at Colorado Public Radio. And so then put that on hold for a hot minute, as in 8 years, and then just graduated last spring with a master's degree from CSU from the department. So that is what got me here. And I really, you know, I loved the radio aspect and I loved the news aspect. And so I really wanted to explore that path. And then at CPR, they have a fellowship opportunities, and they kind of change, sometimes internships and there's fellowships, and kind of depends on the year. But I started at CPR News as a fellow, and that was a year-long program at the time. And then that turned into a full-time job. And then, so I was general assignment for a couple of years, like backup host for on air, and then moved towards so I've always really been drawn to environmental stories and climate stories. And so when CPR started the climate team, I applied for that internally and then joined that. And then that's what led to Colorado River. And then that's what led me to here. So thank you for that question.
How long has your position existed with CWCB?
So my position is brand new. So before my position, so CWCB has so Colorado Water Conservation Board has their own communications specialist. And at the time, he was also covering all Colorado River issues. And it was just becoming more and more clear that it was a full-time job. So We got some funding passed and then actually built up the Colorado River, really have been like building up this team to focus on the Colorado River. So hydrographers and people who are out in the field and people who are in the office working on, doing a bunch of forecasting and kind of numbers like these, stuff like that. And then my job. So I'm the first one to be Colorado River Communications Specialist specifically, but then 50% of my job is Division of Water Resources. So that is the arm of actual of water administration. So the folks who are on the ground, this person is put a call on this river. We're going to go out there. We're going to, tell folks how much water they can and can't use, and well water regulation and administration and things of that nature as well. So really about 50% of my job is Colorado River and then Division of Water Resources. But Colorado River is probably more like 75% of my job. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, if not.
Questions here. Oh, just a second, we have one.
What is the yellow and blue and horizontal lines?
On that chart that we're looking at, what are the yellow and blue horizontal lines? We can't read it from here.
Oh, sure. Okay. And I'm sorry, I'll get to your question in a minute. Okay. So the blue and yellow horizontal lines, and I know this isn't like the best for screen. Oh, and that was not exactly what I want to do. So that yellow line is the compact apportionment set in 1922 with the Colorado River Compact. And then the lower basin gets an additional 1 million acre feet. So essentially, that 7.5 million acre feet is what was agreed upon to say, the upper basin and the lower basin get that amount of water per year, which is a part of the struggle because, these aren't percentages and it's hard numbers and the river is changing with climate change. And then the 8.5, essentially the lower basin states get to use an additional 1 million acre feet or have the legal right to be using that, if that makes sense. So that was all that stuff that was agreed to 100 years ago. Your question.
I was going to ask, so it sounds like you work in an office where there are also a lot of people working on, like you said, forecasting or kind of the science side of things. So as a communications person, I feel like scientists can communicate and work on their communication. So what are some tactics you use to kind of help extract that information and then communicate it to a broader audience?
Yes. That was a huge part of both of my jobs. So that was part of the reason why I probably got this new job is because, being a radio reporter, when you're talking to those people, you want people to connect with them. And so I think that, I was kind of known for having really long interviews with people because they would start to really warm up and connect to the work they're doing, open up as a person, why this matters to them, probably 45 minutes into the conversation. And so I really think it's this process of getting to know them and getting to know why they do this. And also kind of reminding them hey, this stuff that you're working on is really, really cool. And this might be your day-to-day job where you think, water rights administration is, just kind of how things work, or maybe their parents were in it or their parents were in it. So a little bit of helping them understand, no, this is really cool and people want to learn more and they're excited to learn more. So kind of let's start there. Tell me, talk to me like you were coming to a class, or talking to your nephew or niece or something about this topic. And so that's really how I approach interviews a lot of the time. And so if we have to write press releases or anything like that, or if I want, because the team is really great at generating these stories, like that webinar that I showed, right? I reached out to the team and I was like, hey, who do you think can help tell these stories? And so it's really just kind of reminding them about why they're in it in the first place. And, you know, I often ask questions like, especially when it comes to climate change, like, what are you worried about? What's keeping you up at night? What do you want people to know? Giving them that avenue of like, hey, I'm communicating with the public for you. If you know, they could walk away with anything from our conversation. So really it's like about interview prep. And that was actually a slide that I meant to add in here. So thank you for asking that. But really being, you know, prepared for those conversations and kind of like where you know this much, but like you're kind of trying to get people to understand this much and in a way that is engaging. So a lot of times it does take just like long conversations, repeating questions, and yeah, kind of focusing on that humanity aspect of it. Yeah.
You mentioned the idea of like moving water from the Mississippi to Colorado.
Mhm.
Were you able to talk to people in those states? What were they?
Yeah, so we talked with some lawmakers who were, so we talked with a lawmaker in Arizona whose brother is a farmer in the Mississippi River Basin. So he was really interesting, right? Really cool. You know, I use the term characters, but it's like people who can really just like tell the story. And so, you know, his brother, they kind of diversified. They were like, okay, so it's really dry here. So like you move there, where it's really wet, we'll do some farming in both parts of the state or the United States. And then so he's got, you know, his brother telling him how much water is there. And it can really be damaging. Like it can flood, it can be way too much. And so this is kind of this like really interesting story of these brothers who would like to see that happen and feel like there could be, you know, be a way to make it happen. Of course, we have a lot of people who are many holes in that, just the cost and infrastructure and, you know, it would have to be, you know, again, like the conversation of climate change of less water in general. So like if you were only taking surplus water from the Mississippi River Basin and maybe there's like less and less surplus water, then what is that all that infrastructure used for? So yeah, it's a really interesting episode. It was cool to get that perspective from those folks. So yeah, we met some amazing people in that project that have you know, really interesting ideas and really interesting perspectives of like, you know, how that's even on his mind kind of. So. Anything else? Anything that was confusing or like that you want to?
For a second and see if there are any questions at CSU also or online.
We don't have any more questions here, but Michael, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
I have one more. Yeah. So if we have a lot of students in both of these rooms interested in pursuing careers in water resources from the science or the policy side, what are some skill sets you hope that they will develop so that they can be better communicators, or how do you hope that they can you know, gain a lot of the experience that you like, if you have either specific skills or specific ways to gain those skills too?
Yeah. And I meant to mention, and it doesn't sound like there's folks interested in this room in communications, but maybe there's some folks on the call. But the Department of Natural Resources just opened up a communications internship. It's like a 9-month temporary. I think it pays like around $19 an hour. So that just opened up. So if anybody wants to email me or is interested, I can send you that link, or it's also on my LinkedIn. So that's a quick reminder on that. And then, yeah, I would say, you know, there are good resources online about, you know, interview prep, or if you're working on research and, you know, maybe a reporter calls you up, or, you know, you're having to communicate it to the public. I would say that a lot of those skills are kind of like how I would say maybe how I approach Parched, is I try to kind of remember that like process for me of how crazy it was to learn about how water works in the Southwest. And I tried to like take that energy of me from 10 years prior and apply it to the project, like eyes wide open. This is so cool. This is so interesting. This is exciting. So I would say like, maybe don't forget like why you're interested and maybe think like, I always kind of think about like my brother when I tell these stories of like, I know he wants to learn this, but what do I have to do to get him hooked? I would say kind of think about like your favorite person and about what, you know, if you're hanging out and they ask you how your job's going, you know, or the work that you're doing or the degree that you're working on, you know, talking to them really on that like, you know, human scale. But and I also understand the pressure of wanting to sound professional and not make mistakes, or like what I did when I forgot about what the basin states are, when my brain completely blanked. Like I totally get that pressure. It is a real thing for sure. And so, but you know, it's like just feeling like you're working really hard on the topic and knowing that your voice is important and people want to hear what you're working on. And you know, social media is your friend for sure. TikTok and Instagram, really cool people doing really awesome stuff, directly talking to people about the issues that they're working on. Social media skills, for sure, I think would be like really, I love seeing researchers and scientists and professionals who are like in the field taking to social media and just kind of talking to people directly. I think it's super powerful.
And I have one more question from online. What keeps you up at night in relation to moderation?
Oh no, they're using my own question against me. What keeps me up at night? I would say that the people who are really paying attention are worried about the future, but how many people aren't paying attention is probably what concerns me the most. Because like I just said, voices are important, you know, diverse voices are important, and we need to be hearing from all sorts of, you know, people on this very, very important topic. But I get very concerned that people feel like, you know, again, me at 19 years old, having no idea that, you know, how connected I am to water in general, let alone the Colorado River. And I think, you know, I think we're just a good example of a climate crisis happening on the ground right now. And I think we've got a lot of eyes on us from all over the world that are either experiencing similar things or know they're going to experience similar things. So yeah, I think that's probably, it's like, I just want more people to know what's going on so that we can make sure that people are adding their voices to the conversation on what we should be doing.
Like great ending note.
Thank you so much for, thank you.
Nice to see you. Thank you so much.